Now what we're going to look at is contextualizing the church. So we've looked at contextualizing the message when you implant the gospel into a particular context, but now we're actually going to look specifically at contextualizing the church. So please turn to Romans 1, because we're going to start off looking at culture in Romans 1. We've already looked at culture so far on this course, but we're just going to have another look at it from Romans 1, starting at verses 18 to 20. So Romans 1, 18 to 20. And can we have someone read 18, then the next person read 19 and go on? And you can use whatever translation you want.
The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness.
For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them.
For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse.
Okay, so right there, what you see is that God is constantly being revealed to people. He's constantly being revealed to people, yeah? Check out verse 20. His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. It's clearly seen, and God's invisible qualities have been on show since when? Anyone? The creation, yeah. So for that whole time, God has been showing himself to people. Okay, so God is constantly being revealed to people, but in verse 18, we see that people suppress this revelation. So if you look at verse 18, all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth. Yeah, so this is like in the catechism, yeah, the beach ball, pushing it down under the water. So the whole time, on this planet, God is revealing something about himself through creation. You see the trees, and that's showing you something about God the creator who made those trees and who's sustaining them right now. And whilst people are seeing that revelation, people at the same time are trying to suppress that truth. Remember, the beach ball keeps popping up as well. And when it pops up, people will be like, quick, push it down again. Okay. Now let's read verses 21 to 25.
For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened.
Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools,
and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles.
Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another.
Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
Okay, so right there, we see that people exchange the truth for something else. God is continually revealing who he is through creation, and people at the same time are exchanging that truth for a lie. So they see the tree, and instead of being like, oh yeah, I can see the truth that God made that tree, instead they swap that truth, whilst they suppress the truth, they swap that truth for, I'm going to worship that tree. And they start worshipping the tree. And I've just been reading Isaiah, and Isaiah makes a big deal about people that go and chop wood and make an idol out of it and then start worshipping it. People are worshipping the wood. They're worshipping the tree instead of the creator who made the tree. Okay, so just to recap about culture, God is constantly being revealed to people. People suppress this revelation. People exchange this truth for something else. And now let's go on to chapter 2, verses 14 to 15. So if we can have the next two people read chapter 2, verses 14 to 15, please.
Indeed, the Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law. They are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts sometimes accusing them, and at other times even defending them.
Okay. So, what we see here is that people still have a knowledge of the truth. Even though people suppress the truth, God actually does a work in people's consciences, so that they actually still know a fair bit of the truth that is revealed. The requirements of the law are written on their hearts. So, here we go, right? Human hearts are receiving God's revelation and processing it. All day long, human beings are receiving God's revelation and processing it, right? And the result of this processing is a mixture of truth and lies. Okay? There's truth, but that truth gets suppressed. But God makes sure that some of that truth does actually still operate in people's lives, which means that culture is a product of both the bad and the good in the heart. So remember we said before, culture is the externalization of what? Of the heart. Culture is the externalization of the heart. Culture is the externalization of both the good and the bad in the heart. There's a mixture there, okay? Middle class culture is a product of both the good and bad in the heart. Working class culture is a product of both the good and the bad in the heart. Street culture is a product of both the good and the bad in the heart. And then I've left a blank there. Whatever you want to put in there. Whatever culture you can think of, your own culture, someone else's culture, whatever it is, it's a mixture of the good and the bad in the what? In the heart. Okay, so culture, you get a mixture of good and bad in it, right? What has this got to do with contextualizing church? Well, churches are affected by their local culture. Your church is affected by your local culture. We sit in chairs whilst the preacher stands. Does the Bible command that? In ancient times, it would be common for the preacher to sit and people to stand. So why do we have a preacher standing at the front and people sitting? And why do we have our chairs arranged a certain way? Why are they in lines? Does the Bible command to have your chair in lines? Does the Bible command when you have communion, to sit in lines, not look at anyone else in the church, and be given a tiny little cup that you do this? Does the Bible command that? We do that, okay? That is so like British culture. That is the churches being influenced by the local culture. What else? We close our eyes to pray. Where does it command you in the Bible to close your eyes to pray? It doesn't anywhere, In fact, in the Psalms of Ascents, like around Psalm 121 and that bunch of Psalms there, actually says, I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? So So Daniel looked out the window. So do we know he actually looked out the window or just that he opened the window? I don't know. But why do we have a certain way of praying? Why do we tell people, put your hands together when you pray? Where does that come from? There are examples in Scripture of people putting their arms up, holding their arms out to God and praying. Why do we tell people to put their hands together? Local culture. We have things in our culture that influence how we do church. Now, some of our practices might come from another culture that's different to our local culture, and it might alienate us from the local culture. So, for example, someone was telling me this the other day, a predominantly white church put on a New Year's Eve thing, right? And they invited people to it. They invited some Africans to it, and they served alcoholic drinks there. Okay, now middle-class people were well happy. New Year's Eve, glass of wine. Yeah, for those Christians, it was fine. For the Africans, a number of them were offended. Why do you think they were offended?
Some of them don't drink alcohol.
So alcohol was being served that a Christian do, and what else?
They're not expected to pray and worship.
New Year's Eve, you pray in the new year. Pray in the new year, man. And these guys are having a little sort of like wine party, and the Africans aren't happy. So there's an example of where The church event was done with a middle-class culture, tried inviting people from another culture into it. People from the other culture were offended. And here's the thing, because the Bible doesn't command you anywhere to have wine parties, then, that's one of those things that's like, you've got to think about it and be like, why do we keep doing this? Do we really need to do this? Is this helping us contextualize the gospel in our area? Is this really implanting the gospel into this specific context where we've got Africans? Okay, so if you could do the discussion question now, please. All right, let's move on to potted plant churches. Mr. Murthy, an Indian evangelist, said, "Do not bring us the gospel as a potted plant. Bring us the seed of the gospel and plant it in our soil." A potted plant church, could also be called a cookie cutter church. Yeah, when you do cookie cutters, you make up the dough, and then you get your cookie cutter of a certain shape, and you stick it in, and it cuts out a little shape. And you're like, great, I've got a nice little, that'll be a nice biscuit when it's cooked. And then you cookie cut the next bit of dough, and it's exactly the same shape. And you're like, there's another nice biscuit. Then you cookie cut another bit of dough, and it's exactly the same shape. There's another nice biscuit. Often, we can take that approach to church planting, where all the churches we start are from exactly the same cookie cutter, and they just look exactly the same. So a potted plant approach will bring all the parts of the sending culture, both good and bad. So what I mean by that is a cookie cutter approach will say, okay, this is how we've done church in our culture, and this is how we do the worship. This is how we do the Bible teaching. This is how we do the offering, right? This is how we do the teas and coffees. And then they go to start another church in another culture, and they just do all those same things exactly the same way. Now, here's the thing. When they do that, they're going to bring in stuff from their culture, because a lot of those things aren't how the Bible says to do them, as you've just found in the exercise you've done. They're actually things about... sorry, I lost my train of thought. They're actually things that just come from our culture. How you do the teas and coffees. Probably the way you do teas and coffees is not how the Bible says it. Yeah? In our church, when we do our church lunch, we say women and children come up first. Does it say anywhere in the Bible women and children should come up first? No. Where might we have problems? Let's say we then went and planted a church in Africa, somewhere in Africa, and did that. What might be strange?
Maybe because normally you serve like the men, or the women serve the men.
Right. So we could bring our culture along where we're saying, well, women and children eat first. And we try and do that in an African context, and people are like, this is strange. The women should be serving the men. And so then we've imported our culture into another context.
I think might be a north-south thing as well, because up north, the man normally sits and Gaz's dinner brought them on a tray while he's watching the footy or something like that. So the men are generally served up north as well. Yeah,
but I don't want to get bogged down about serving. I'm just making the point. We import our culture into other contexts. So a potted plant approach will bring in all the parts of the sending culture, both good and bad. So locals might easily spot the bad parts of the culture, whilst the church planters are oblivious to this. So say I go to Africa, and I'm saying ladies first, and locals turn up and they're like, this ain't right. I don't like this. They might even be like, this don't seem biblical to me. And the whole time, I'm oblivious to this. And when I'm sending my newsletters out to you, I'm saying we still can't get people coming more than one Sunday to church. People have got hard hearts. It could be people are just like, whoa, this is weird, and I'm oblivious. Next point. Locals might well reject the culture of this church before they've even heard the gospel message. They might just straight away be like, I don't want nothing to do with this church. And they don't even get a chance to hear the gospel. It's just the culture straight away. There's a church in a neighboring area to this, And I remember years ago, I saw they had like a flyer or sort of brochure, which I guess was a cultural thing as well. Instead of a flyer, it was actually like one of those fold-out brochures. And they were trying to sell their small groups that meet in the week. And they were like, Wednesday evening small groups. And then you had a picture of some people in someone's living room with a glass of wine laughing. From my culture, that's like, I don't know if anyone here ever played rugby, but a handoff. When someone runs to tackle you, you put your hand out like that, and their face just goes into your hand, and they're like, ooh. For me, seeing a photo with red wine and people laughing is a handoff. That's basically saying, this ain't for you, mate. This ain't your culture. So that could be, now I was a Christian, but what if I wasn't a Christian and straight away I'm like, oh, that ain't for me. Then I don't turn up to that church, then I don't hear the gospel message. Next point, locals might misunderstand the gospel message because of the wrapper it comes in. So sweets come in a wrapper. Every time we share the gospel with people, it comes in a wrapper. It's got some external covering to it, which is our own culture. And when people come to our churches, there is an external cover to it, which can miscommunicate the gospel, or people can misunderstand the gospel. So I'll give an example. I went to a church once, my first time ever at the church, and as I'm walking up the door, someone stopped me and said, can you please go downstairs so that you don't disturb the word? Okay. From their perspective, what they have is a very high view of scripture. And they're like, listen, the pastor's preaching right now. We don't want that being disturbed. Yeah, someone walks in late, it's going to disturb the preacher. It's going to disturb the people listening. We value God's word so highly that we don't want that to happen. And that's a good thing, right? From my perspective, I've never been in a church like that. I was just offended. Not in a like, oh, he's bang out of order, but I was kind of like, oh, I'm not welcome here. So I went down to the basement entrance and went in, but I sat there feeling really unwelcome. That's an example of a wrapper, yeah? The wrapper the gospel came in for me that Sunday was someone saying, don't come in this entrance, come in downstairs. I was already a Christian, okay? But for me, it was like, oh, I don't feel welcome. But imagine how it would feel for a non-Christian. So this is why we don't want to do cookie cutter church planting, because there will be lots of things in that wrapper that will offend certain cultures. If we haven't thought about it, we could actually hinder a lot of people coming and hearing the gospel. Another example of it would be when churches, you get a church plant in London, and then they put up signs everywhere saying, crusade next week. What does that communicate to Muslims? That reminds people of guys who used to go around Europe, yeah, just massacring people, raping and pillaging, and then having wars with Muslims. So then some church turns up, and because their pastor led them to the Lord through a crusade, and they've adopted that part of the culture, now they are doing the same thing and saying crusade, which is one of the most unhelpful words to use when you're doing an outreach. I think one of the interesting things at the moment is you hear people talking about, you hear it in Birmingham as well, churches talking about, not all churches are saying this, but people saying they're going to transform their communities. Well, if the Muslims said that, what would the newspapers be saying? Yeah, this is extremism going on here, right? Yeah, we got Trojan horses going on and everything, yeah? Christians these days keep using this word transform, and I don't think people realize that in the context, that's not always a helpful word to use. But it could differ from context to context, but it's just another example of a wrapper that stuff comes in. So if you could do the discussion question now, please. So one of the ways you can know if your church is a potted plant church is by looking at the person who planted it and seeing what church he comes from. And if your church looks just like the church you come from, then you've got a bit of a potted plant church going on there. One of the things to bear in mind when you think about these things is bear in mind that you guys are all Christians and your culture is somewhat confused right now. I don't mean that in a bad way, but what I mean is I might think my culture, yeah, is council estate, white working class. I might think that, but I've been in the church for years. which means I've been influenced by African culture when I've been in African churches, yeah? I've been influenced by American culture when I've been in American churches. I've been influenced by white middle-class culture when I've been in white middle-class churches. So now I might make a judgment call about something and say, well, this will make people feel comfortable. But I'm actually speaking out of my mixed-up culture from being in church for so many years. So one of the interesting conversations that I've had with people over the years is some people who've come out of Pentecostal churches and who have now said, look, I felt like some of the stuff was over the top. There were too many excesses in the worship. Some of those people will then gravitate to white middle class worship style. And if that's you, I'm not passing any judgment on you, yeah, but if that's you, you've just got to be very careful about not assuming that everyone from your initial culture will like that style of worship. Because if they haven't been on the same journey as you, then they're not going to appreciate it. So you might go to some church and be like, oh, the worship here is so refreshing because I went to a church where the worship was really loud and there was a lot of abuses going on there. And so now I like coming to your church where it's really chilled out and there's a guy sitting on a stool playing Spanish guitar and there's a guy on the cajon. That might work great for you and for anyone who's traveled your journey. But you might find for your neighbors, when they turn up there, they're like, what is this weird thing? And they might be like, I don't like this at all. And I've been in some Christian contexts where I've been incredibly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, all the Christians around me have been as happy as Larry. And I've just been sitting there thinking, I want to get out of here. Feeling really uncomfortable, really out of my comfort zone. That's as a Christian. So just think about how it is for the non-Christians. Now, of course, one of the problems in the UK is that a lot of our church planting just results in bringing people in from other churches. Yeah, and so this is something we've got to bear in mind as well, yeah? Ideally, we want to plant churches that are actually going to see converts in the community. So it's definitely worth thinking about this question, because if you want converts from the community, you've really got to think about what kind of wrapper does the gospel come in our church for the locals. Okay, let's move on to indigenous church. Indigenous church, and if you remember before, when I'm saying indigenous, I'm talking about local. I'm just talking about local people, yeah? Definitions of indigenous church. So I'm going to give you John Mark Terry's definition here. I'm going to give you about 3 different definitions. John Mark Terry says, churches that are able to reproduce themselves in a particular culture and reflect the cultural distinctives of their ethno-linguistic group. So John Terry's saying an indigenous church can duplicate itself. Okay, so, and no, it's nothing to do with football. So an indigenous church, yeah, can reproduce itself, so there end up being other churches, yeah, and it's all done within that particular culture. And it even reflects the cultural distinctives of that group. So if you were planting in an area where men wore robes, when you plant that church, what are men going to wear? Robes. When they plant their churches, what are they going to wear? Robes. Excellent. What did a lot of missionaries do when they went to Africa and planted churches? What did they make the locals wear? Suits. So now you've got places in Africa where the Christians wear suits and the locals don't wear suits. And if you don't wear a suit, you're seen as backsliding, right? But then obviously to the locals, the Christians look totally different. That's a problem. That's a problem that we took over, because we did the potted plant approach in Africa. Okay, now let's look at Alan Tippett's definition. He was an Australian missionary in the South Pacific. Alan Tippett says that indigenous church is when the indigenous people of a community think of the Lord as their own, not as a foreign Christ. So when the people in the community, they see Jesus as their Lord, not as a foreigner's God, yeah? When they do things as unto the Lord. So the things they do, they're actually doing them for God. Not just because the missionary told them this is what you're supposed to do. Meeting the cultural needs around them. So the things they do actually meet the cultural needs around them, not what the missionary has said. So for example, what purpose does a suit have? wearing a suit? What's the purpose of it? What's the purpose of a tie?
Go to court.
It could be, so in this country, yeah, if you're going to court, you wear a suit. You know, people who turn up at court in a tracksuit, you're just asking for it. Yeah, you wear a suit to court, right? But practically, what function does a suit have? What function does a tie have? No one knows what the function of a tie is. It doesn't do anything other than spread diseases in hospitals. And when you're fixing your car, it can kill you, right? It gets caught in the fan belt, you're dead, right? So if you went to another culture and you made them wear ties, that's not, if it's not addressing a cultural need in the area, that's not indigenous church. You've just given them something that doesn't address a need in their culture. And then it says, worshipping in patterns they understand. Worshipping it, so you worship in a way that the local people hear that worship and they're like, I understand that. Not like what we did in Europe for years, where services were conducted in what language? Latin. So no one could understand. In fact, most priests could not even understand. They didn't know enough Latin to even understand the services. So even the priest didn't understand what was going on. So, that is an example of how for years in Europe, we didn't have indigenous church in Europe, right? What's that? Worshipping in patterns they understand. When their congregations function in participation in a body which is structurally indigenous, then you have an indigenous church. So the body of the church is structurally indigenous. It's made up of local people. It has local people who are involved in the leadership of it, unlike a church where you have lots of outsiders come in. And that's still popular church planting strategy today, right? I mean, people still do that on this. The people have been trying to plant churches for years on this estate. And people, every so many years, you get a new bunch that come from Tooting or from Balham, or people will come and they will try and plant, and they will drive in every Sunday, have a service, drive out, drive in the next Sunday, have a service, and they will do that for a few years. Like hardcore, 10 out of 10 for perseverance, But the churches tend to not take off in the local, they don't become indigenous churches. They don't have indigenous structure. Okay, let's go on to William Smalley's definition. This is the one we're going to focus on the most. So William Smalley has said that indigenous church, it is a group of believers who live out their life, including their socialized Christian activity, in the patterns of the local society. So he's saying there, indigenous church, even the way they socialize is within the patterns of the local community. If people in the community sit on street corners having conversations, the indigenous church, when they get together, they sit on street corners having decisions, having discussions. Yeah. That would be indigenous church. Now, an ethnocentric approach, I saw this in Albania, when I was in Albania years ago, had lots of men sitting down on the pavement, like chatting to one another. And you've got to understand, incredibly high unemployment when communism, that's what happens when communism falls, you just have crazy unemployment. You can't just switch to capitalism the next day and suddenly have jobs and infrastructure and all that. So there's loads of men out of work, sitting down having conversations. Sometimes you would hear missionaries, particularly female missionaries, complain about these Albanian men. All they do is sit on the street corners talking. Now that would be an ethnocentric approach. Remember, we've done this before, ethnocentrism, where you make judgments about another culture based on your own, and it's often emotional. Yeah. Whereas really what it should be doing is trying to understand, like, why are they sitting on the street corner? Oh, there's no jobs. What are they doing? They are talking to one another as men, having good manly relationships. Albanian men will even walk down the street sometimes just like holding hands with one another. It's like they have like very strong relationships with one another, different to how white European men do. So there's a lot of common grace there. There's something really good in their culture going on there, but some missionaries would look at them and just judge them. Whereas really what a missionary should be thinking is, if we want indigenous church, then maybe that means the Christians need to be sitting on street corners, having conversations. That would be indigenous church. But if we lock ourselves away in our little mission stations, we can have all the fellowship in the world, but we're doing it in the way that the missionary does fellowship, not in the way the locals do. So back to Smalley. He says, and for whom any transformation of that society comes out of their felt needs under the guidance of the Holy Spirit and the Scriptures. So here he's talking about if there is any transformation in the society, it's coming from their felt needs, the way the Holy Spirit has guided them, the way Scriptures have guided them. Yeah, as opposed to, like this, and I don't know if it's true, but there's this story of these missionaries that went to some place, they built an orphanage, and then they started going around the villages saying to people, have you got any orphans? They couldn't get any orphans. Someone told them, in our culture, we don't have orphans, because we always make sure someone takes care of the orphan. There'll be some relative or someone who takes care of them. So that'd be an example. They set something up, but not for the felt needs of the culture they were trying to reach. They set something up for what they thought were the felt needs. And this is one of the things you'll notice if you start reading any like missional books or go to any missional conferences these days. One of the things that I think is a shame at the moment is because a lot of the speakers are middle class, a lot of the things that people get told they're supposed to do aren't necessarily the felt needs of the local community. And so sometimes people think, yeah, we're being really missional, and they're doing the felt needs that some white middle-class missional guru has said this is what you need to do. And they try and do it in a Pakistani council estate, and it's just not the felt need for that culture, and they're not going to end up with indigenous church. Okay, but something that Smalley does say is that missionaries can still suggest alternatives. So what Smalley's getting at here is he's saying, look, missionaries too often have come in and they've told people, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. This is how you do the offering, and this is how you do your worship, and this is how you do that, and don't do that. Smalley's saying, no, indigenous church, you let those people, as they are filled with the Holy Spirit and they're reading the Scriptures, you let them say, this is how we should do worship. This is how we should do offering. And we should stop doing this. But he's saying the missionary can still offer suggestions. So he's saying, look, cross-cultural missionaries don't have to be like, I can never say anything. They can say stuff, but it needs to be a suggestion. Yet the local people who've got the Holy Spirit in them, they're the people who make the decisions what they're going to do. So the outcome of planting the gospel in a neighborhood should be an indigenous church. And I'm going to say that again because hardly anyone does this. The outcome of implanting the gospel into a neighborhood should be an indigenous church. That's what it should be. Not a church full of outsiders who left other churches and moved in. Okay? Although those people might well stay. I'm not saying you can't ever have people move into a neighborhood to help plant a church. And I'm not saying those people can stay, that they can't stay in the life of the church. But what I'm saying is we shouldn't do that and then be like, great, now we got a church. You know, I heard someone actually say a while back, they planted a church and they were interviewed on it and they said, well, church planting is really easy. And I thought, yeah, potted plant church planting is real easy. But implanting the gospel into a neighborhood and seeing local converts rise up, and then the church taking the shape of the local community, but in a way that's transformed by the gospel, that's hard graft. Yeah, that's like gardening, and that is hard graft. And, you know, Paul in Galatians says he's felt like he was going through childbirth, trying to see Christ formed in the Galatians. So it is hard graft, this business. Also, it's not a church that reflects the missionaries' culture, but it's a church that reflects the local culture. For some of us, it could be churches we've been in have really reflected the missionaries' culture. And it's worth us thinking, what's the local culture and what is the missionaries' culture? And we want to make sure that when we're planting churches, that we're making sure it fits the local culture and not what our own culture is. Okay, if you can do the discussion questions now, please. One of the things that I think is worth just pointing out is it can often be hard for us to recognize that there is a culture in our neighborhood. So even just going around the room listening to you discuss, like a number of people saying, well, there's quite a mixture of people. You will still find in your locality that there is a corporate culture. So this estate here, right? One of the fascinating things about this estate is, it started off as like a white working class council estate for people who've been bombed in the East End. They could be housed here. So it starts off with a certain culture, yeah? The culture of it starts changing, and we have an estate with a lot of victim mentality in it, and then you see people immigrating. So you see maybe like an African immigrate over who had some kind of what people would call a professional job, although I find the term a bit strange, but someone who was something like a doctor or something like that, or accountant. He starts living on the estate. He's living in a council flat with his family, and he's bringing in his African professional worldview. Over a period of time, guess what? He's taken on board a lot of the council estate worldview. Over a period of time, you hear him having victim mentality that he didn't have when he first moved to the estate. At the same time, the neighbors around him are having their worldview changed. There's some people who might have had a certain attitude towards Africans. After living next to this guy, their worldview starts to change. And they start seeing things a bit differently. And together, what happens is, on the estate, together corporately, people create a worldview that is a mixture of everyone's stuff. And there are different subgroups and different subcultures, as we talked about. But you will find distinctives in your local area, which is why there'll be distinctives in this city of London that will be different to other cities. So Birmingham and London have different worldviews. Yeah, and it's interesting when you look into church growth, how church growth works differently in different cities. Some cities like to protect the old way of doing things, and other cities really like new ideas. And guess which ones tend to have more church growth? Ones that like new ideas, right? Exactly. So it's a difficult question when you're trying to think, how can we do indigenous church in our area? It's not an easy question. But there are answers. There are answers to be found. But it is a difficult one. But let me move on now to actually contextualizing church. How are we going to contextualize church? First off, don't assume that what you do makes sense to the locals. Don't assume that what you do makes sense to the locals. An example of that would be at Lystra. If you remember, we read this last week. Paul heals a guy at Lystra, right? And what do all the people start doing in Acts 14? Start worshipping him. Okay. He's just done a bit of gospel ministry, yeah? But it's been misunderstood by the locals. So don't assume that what you do will be understood the right way. One example of this, I say, would be community work. I've seen this. You'll think I'm exaggerating here, but I'm not. I've seen this. If a Christian group focuses a lot on doing community work, you might get locals say, Christianity is only for good people, not people like me. I've seen those Christians. They do loads of good work in the neighborhood. They're really good people. Someone like me, I could never be a Christian. Do you see how someone doing community work, which is a good thing, it hasn't communicated the gospel the right way. Instead, it's communicated works righteousness. Another thing that comes from that is people thinking that Christianity is about doing community work. Christianity is about doing community work. So then someone says, well, if I'm doing community work, I'm a Christian. Now, you're going to think I'm exaggerating, but I've had real conversations with people who've told me they're Christians. And I've been like, oh, wonderful. So, what are you reading in the Bible at the moment? And they're like, huh? And I'm like, asking them questions about their faith. And they're just like, huh? And then they tell me, well, I'm like, so what do you do? And they're like, well, I do community work. And then when I've done so many community work jobs, then I get taken on a trip, innit? I'm just like, oh man, they're not a Christian. They're not a Christian at all. They're what's called a rice Christian. You know, missionaries found, like in China, where if there was someone who was poor, they would start coming to the missionary's house and Bible studies to get rice. And the missionary would be like, great, I've got a convert here. So even doing something like community work could be misunderstood in your neighborhood. But I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying don't assume that your community work or whatever the thing is you do actually communicates the gospel to the locals. It might not. Next thing, consider what issues exclude locals. What issues exclude locals? So, for example, in Acts 15, we've looked at Acts 15 before. There's a problem in Acts 15. Who remembers what the problem is? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Okay, Acts 15, verse 1. Certain people came down from Judea to Antioch and were teaching the believers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom taught by Moses, you cannot be saved. That's a big problem, right? Right there, it's telling Gentiles, church ain't for you unless you get circumcised, okay? Now, when you read that chapter, Acts 15, what you see is that the way they dealt with it in the end showed people that church was for the Gentiles too. In the end, they said, you don't have to be circumcised. They said, there are these things we do want you to do because all over the place there's synagogues, and if you do these other things, it's going to cause a stumbling block to Jews. And we want Jews to know that church is for them as well. But the beauty of Acts 15 is Paul and then Peter and everyone in Jerusalem, they end up dealing with this problem to get rid of the offense, get rid of the thing that would stop people becoming Christians, yeah, and showing them that church is for the Gentiles too. Now, years later, Luther did the same. Luther showed that church was for Germans, not just Romans. Now, I'm not expecting our world history to be that amazing, but basically, Luther really put Germany on the map, with the Reformation, and just showed, look, church is for ordinary Germans, German Bible, German worship songs, whereas before everything would be in what language? Latin, which is basically saying it's for Romans. It's for everything out of Rome. Then Anglicanism, I know there's no Anglicans here today, but Anglicanism showed that church was for the English too. Yeah, when the Church of England was started, church is not just for Rome and anyone who bows the knee to Rome, it's actually for English people too. That's a big deal. Then you got Charles Wesley, and Charles Wesley showed that church was for common people too. Common people. And so, a lot of his work and the work he saw was amongst common people. So, what am I getting at here? Acts 15, the way they deal with this problem where the Gentiles are being told they need to be circumcised and they wrestle with it and they're like, no, they don't. The way they did this shows us that we also need to think through issues. We need to think through issues in our neighborhoods. So, for example, what is our church's approach to alcohol? Yeah, you probably need to think that through, right? If you want to reach out to Muslims, you probably really need to think that through. Yeah, if every Friday night you have a church movie night and you're drinking beers, yeah, you need to think that through if you want to reach Muslims. How are Muslims going to come into that environment? How are they going to understand that? What are they going to think of your faith? What does it communicate to them? What about Sunday football? That's an issue you got to think about. Like Sunday football. What do we do as a church about Sunday football? How is Sunday football perceived in our neighborhood? And how does that fit in our church life? If people are saying they're not coming to church because they're watching the football, how do we approach that? If people are saying they're not coming to communion because of football, how do we approach that? By the way, with neither of these, alcohol or football, with neither of them am I saying this is what you got to do. I'm saying these are some of the things you got to think about. When you do your lunch, church lunch, who goes to eat first? Do you say ladies first? Do you say men first? Do you say children first? Do you do it by tables? Like these are just things to think through. There's so many things to think through. Are you a stand-up, sit-down church? What does that communicate to people? I've even had someone who come to church and they were so scared to come, one, because they thought they were going to be judged for being a single mum, and two, they were really worried that they wouldn't know when to stand up and sit down. So they almost didn't come to church. And when they come, they were like, I really like the fact it's really casual. Like, I didn't need to know, now I'm standing up, now I'm sitting down. And she was like, it's such a relief. So these are some of the things that we wanna think through. If you have a worship band, are the worship band at the front facing everyone? If so, why? I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm just saying think it through. People you're trying to reach, what does it communicate to them? The way the worship team are dressed. If you're trying to reach Muslims, what does that communicate to them? There's loads and loads and loads of issues. What if you start getting blind people come to church? Like we had at our church, have to start rethinking issues. Being like, well, we do this way, but now we've got some blind people come in, that don't really work. The blind people are going to feel like outsiders. We've got to change the way we're doing stuff. We thought it was great that we send out a worship mix of how the worship's going to be every week so people can practice worshiping in their homes during the week. We give people a video with the music and the words so they can sing in their families, in their households, worship. It's exactly the way the worship's going to be on Sunday. That's great until blind people come to church. What are blind people going to do with a video that puts the words up on the screen? So then it's like, okay, we got to rethink that because the gospel's coming in a wrapper. And to blind people, that wrapper says, this gospel here is for sighted people. So many issues to think through, and it's hard work, but it's worth doing it. So if you could just do the discussion questions in class, please. Okay, so we're looking at how to contextualize church, and what we're going to talk about briefly is contextualizing the preaching. Contextualizing the preaching. I believe that preaching is a huge component of church. A huge component. Not the only one, but a huge component. So we want to make sure the wrapper that our preaching comes in is right and contextualized. So we've already covered this on the course, right? The biggest tool you got on this course for contextualized preaching is what? FCF. That is the biggest tool you've got for contextualized preaching, for implanting the gospel into specific contexts. The FCF, I think, is so helpful in contextualization. But also, for contextualized preaching, we want to think about our style. So that's why we did about, I gave you tips for a certain style to preach. I can't tell you about all your context, but in my context, in my cultural context, we don't really sit down listening to lectures very often. No one is sending YouTube videos out on this estate saying, here's an hour-long lecture on the Quran, watch this. People will send a 5-minute clip. Here's some Muslim guy showing how Christianity is a lie. People will share that on Facebook. Short, sharp thing like that. People will, however, sit down and listen to an hour of stand-up comedy. Okay? That tells me something about my culture. There is not an academic inability to sit down for an hour and listen to someone. But there's something about a style in which something is presented that some people get and others don't. So I think we need to think, what style am I going to do my preaching in? And if we're going to contextualize it, there's 2 parts to that. What are they? No, I see, I've caught you out here. It's not in the handout. If we're contextualizing, what's that? That's the second one, yeah. Identification and transformation. So my style of preaching needs to identify with the local people, in a sense that locals would be like, the way this guy is delivering his message, I get that. I can sit here listening to that. At the same time, I want to transform it. I want to transform it so that I'm actually showing, hey, but this is the way Christ would have us communicate. Which means I have to eliminate all the things in my culture that are found in delivering messages, like crudeness, pride, and that kind of stuff. And we've covered this before under contextualizing the message. So I won't spend any more time on contextualized preaching, because we've done this before. But let's move on to one of my favorite topics, contextualizing praise, or contextualizing worship. I know everything in our life should be an act of worship, so I say praise, so you know that I'm actually talking about the singing. The singing. We know the Bible does tell us to sing. So that's a given, right? We've got to sing, right? But there are some principles we're going to look at here. So first off, I'm going to quote John Terry again, not the footballer. Truly indigenous churches should manifest worship practices that are consistent with the Bible, but also reflect the local culture. So he's saying if you're a truly indigenous church, the way you worship, the way you praise is going to fit the Bible, but it's also going to reflect your culture. So we're going to come on to that. Well, first, let's look at the biblical principles. Please turn to 1 Corinthians 14:23. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 23. And what we're going to see is that our praises need to be intelligible to outsiders. Our praises need to make sense to outsiders. So 1 Corinthians 14, 23. Could I have someone read that out, please?
If therefore the whole church comes together and all speak in tongues, and outsiders or believers enter, will they not say that you are all out of your minds?
Thank you. So right there, the idea is that church come together, everyone's praying in tongues. Now, there's different views of what praying in tongues is, but if, just for the sake of argument, you take the argument that praying in tongues is declaring praises to God, okay, in a different language. And so you've got a bunch of people, they're all praising God, they're declaring the mighty deeds of God in tongues. A non-Christian comes in, they hear that, and all they think is you are out of your mind. They do not understand what you are saying. So our praises to God, when we gather together as a church, need to make sense to non-Christians. They need to make sense to non-Christians. Okay? So that's something we have to think about. Do our worship songs actually make sense to non-Christians? And if they don't, what are we going to do about that? So, for example, if you've decided in your context you're going to do hymns, it might well be in your particular context, hymns is the best way of communicating the gospel. It might be if you don't do hymns, people will be like, you're not a proper church. But if you then do hymns, you've got to work out a way to make those hymns intelligible to other people. We actually have a worship song. We do a remix, a reggae remix of Robert Murray McShane's When This Passing World Is Done. We were singing it last night in my living room. And there's some old English in there, and that we've got to deal with that. We're like, either we need to scrap the song, or we need to actually make sure people understand what some of those old English words mean. Otherwise, we're missing out a biblical principle of our praises being intelligible. Okay, if you could now please turn to Colossians 3, verse 16. Because our next principle for contextualized worship is that our praises need to be rooted in God's word. Our praises need to be rooted in God's word. Could someone please read out Colossians 3:16?
Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God.
So there, we're told to sing songs, right? And at the beginning of the verse, though, in order for us to be able to sing those songs, it says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. So that means that the things we sing, the songs we write, need to be rooted in God's word. I think that's important. I did see a video of, I tried to not do too many details. There was a new worship song out. And they were interviewing the writers of this song, and they said, how did you come up with this song? And they said, we were at a conference, and the theme of the conference was, and they gave a phrase. It wasn't a phrase from the Bible, it was just the theme of the conference. And it was like, and I started thinking, yeah, So I started writing a song about that, and then my mate was like, yeah, and then we started doing it together. And then they sang it, and I was like, wow, it doesn't sound rooted in God's word. It sounds rooted in that conference. And I thought, that's scary to me, that people would even interview you about it, and they'd be like, oh, this tune's really blowing up at the moment, isn't it? You know, and I was like, wow, we've got to make sure our songs are rooted in God's word. Okay, now I'm going to give you some case studies, right? So first we're going to go to one of my favorite books, Bruchko. So when Bruchko, when he met Indians in South America, before meeting the Motalone tribe, this was before he met them, he invited some of the Indians to church, right? So this is another tribe, not the Motalones. And they refused. They didn't want to come to church. And they told him that the Indian converts didn't care about them anymore. The Indian converts didn't care about them anymore. And this is what they said. They've rejected everything about us. They won't sing our songs now. They sing those weird wailing songs that are all out of tune and don't make sense. And the construction that they call a church, have you seen their church? It's square. How can God be in a square church? Round is perfect. It has no ending like God. But the Christians, their God has points all over, bristling at us. And how those Christians dress such foolish clothes. Okay, so you see what's happened there. Missionaries have come, They've done potted plant church in a square building, which is not sensitive to the culture. It communicates the wrong thing, Make them wear funny clothes that communicates the wrong thing, and make them sing weird, wailing, out-of-tune songs. Now, here's the sad thing. This ties in with what I was saying before. The converts, they're probably loving these songs, They're probably like, great, this is great. Not like our old pagan songs. But part of what they're taking is just the culture of the missionary that is not necessarily biblical. It's just the culture, that culture's way of doing it. If you study music, you learn that different cultures have different ways of doing music, even different notes. And so, whereas for us, a lot of anyone who knows music, how many notes do we have in an octave? So for us, that just seems normal, right? Eight notes in an octave. If we hear something played a different way, we're like, ooh, that sounds a bit weird. Well, with these converts, they were probably like, oh, this new way of singing is the godly way of singing. But it wasn't necessarily. And now they've lost what? Missionary power. They've lost Bavinck's missionary power. And it hasn't communicated the gospel to the local Indians. Instead, it's just communicated people who become Christians don't care about us anymore. Does the gospel teach that? The gospel doesn't teach when you get converted, don't care about your people group no more. Don't care about your family no more. It doesn't. In fact, it even says if you don't take care of your family, then you're worse than the pagans. So right here we can see a real life example of taking a potted plant approach to worship and the devastating effects that can have. Okay, now let's read on. Then this local boy called Bobby becomes a Christian. And it's interesting how this happens as well, because he doesn't do evangelism the way that Bruchko wants him to. He waits till they have their special festival and everyone's together. Bruchko's thinking, why is he missing all these opportunities to share the gospel? Bobby's waiting for his own cultural way of doing it. Gets everyone together, and then he starts singing a song to all the Motalone Indians. If I remember rightly, I think he's standing on his hammock as he does this. And he's singing to the rest of the tribe, And he's singing this long song explaining the gospel to them. And Bruchko there the whole time is repulsed by the song. He's repulsed by it, and he says, inside me, he's very honest. Inside me, however, a spiritual battle was raging. I found myself hating the song. It seemed so heathen. The music, chanted in a strange minor key, sounded like witch music. It seemed to degrade the gospel. Yet when I looked at the people around me and up at the chief swinging in his hammock, I could see that they were listening as though their lives depended on it. Bobby was giving them spiritual truth through the song. Still, I wanted to do it my way until I heard Bobby sing about Jesus giving him a new language. Can't you see the reality that he is giving them? God seemed to ask me. But Lord, I replied, why am I so repulsed by it? Then I saw that it was because I was sinful. I could love the Mottalone way of life, but when it came to spiritual matters, I thought I had the only way. But my way wasn't necessarily God's way. God was saying, I too love the Mottalone way of life. I made it, and I'm going to tell them about my son in my way. I relaxed, able at last to find real joy in Bobby's song. That night, a spiritual revolution swept over the people. No one rejected the news about Jesus. So Britchko is like every one of us. He has a cultural preference to how you should do worship music. And he felt like his way was the right way. And we all have a similar problem because all of us are ethnocentric, right? And there's been worship wars going on for years about this, the right way to do worship. The funny thing is I haven't found anyone who gets involved in the worship wars about how to do worship who actually worships anything like the Israelites did in the Old Testament. Yeah. So until you get some Canaanite type instruments that make noises that would sound repulsive to us, and you start doing it a bit more of a wailing way, the way you sing, and don't have any of the sort of meter that we have to our songs, until you do that, then you ain't worshipping the way they did in the Old Testament. But here's the thing, right? The Bible doesn't command us that we must worship in exactly the same way. For example, it doesn't say learn Hebrew before you can worship God. It doesn't say that anyway. It does tell us worship him with the loud cymbals, so I would argue it's a good idea to have some cymbals if God blesses you with cymbals. If you don't have cymbals, I don't think you have to be like, oh no, we're out of God's will. But it would definitely be wrong to criticize people who worship with cymbals. And it definitely would be wrong to have a snobbery that says, well, you can have cymbals on a drum kit, but the way these African chappies bang cymbals, that's just pure paganism. You know, that is an anachronism, because when King David said praise him on the loud cymbals, he wasn't talking about a Pearl Export drum kit. Yeah, that's not what he's talking about. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure as well he didn't mean only hit the cymbals with the brushes. I'm sure they didn't have brushes in those days. Yeah. So loud crashing cymbals, there you go. Okay, right, rant over. So that's Britchko, yeah? Britchko, yeah, it says it all. Okay, now let's talk about another approach, yeah, for contextualizing worship. This is the wrong approach. This is what's called an ethnocentric approach. Please note, this is the wrong approach, yeah? I know these handouts here, you'll put them away, never read them again. In 5 years' time, you'll need them for something. You pull them out, and I'd hate it if you were like, oh yeah, the ethnocentric approach, and started teaching that and saying that I taught you this. This is how you shouldn't do it, right? So Roland Allen, in his book, Missionary Method, St. Paul's or Ours, Roland Allen gives this critique. There's a great bit in his book where he tells you a story of two missionaries. One of them's a real-life missionary, and the other is a composite, an imaginary missionary made up of all the missionaries he's come across in his time as a missionary. And he says this, a missionary gives the choir surplices. Now, who knows what a surplice is? It's the white gown that you get given to be in the choir. Okay, so this is in a faraway land, yeah, a missionary gives the choir surplices. So this is talking about late 19th century, yeah, possibly early 20th. Gets bells and harmoniums. A harmonium is a type of keyboard. And altar linen. Okay, so this is what the missionary does, yeah? He gets his choir together from his converts. He gives them these robes to wear. They do that in Roehampton, by the way, at the Catholic Church, yeah? Gets some bells, okay? Because back home in the church, they would have bells. There's bells in some churches today. Gets a harmonium and the keyboard. Now, I like that. Straight away, I'm like, ooh, I like the keyboard, yeah? I have a cultural preference. I like keyboard. And then he gets an altar linen, a cloth to put over the big altar that they're going to have have at the front. He got them to sing translations of hymns, ancient and modern. So this would be like the hymn book back home. So he brings it over to this country. He's just shared the gospel with them, and now he gets them singing these hymns, right? And now I'll quote Roland Allen. Though the tunes were to them unnatural, and the translations imperfect, and sometimes to them almost incomprehensible. So he's saying, he gets them singing these songs, even though they can't understand all the songs, and they seem strange to them. Thus the services in his churches became the admiration of visitors from England. So what happens now? People visit from England, and they see a church, like, oh, you've got the surplices, you've got the bells, and you're singing all these jolly good old hymns. This is wonderful. But then look what he says. But the natives neglected the upkeep of the altar linen and surplices. So the natives, they're not keeping the linen all nice and clean, okay? And sometimes, check this out, sometimes the natives would meet together and, quote, sing native hymns, which one of them had written to native tunes. To the neglect of the daily offices, the missionary was disheartened. So what's happened is there's someone there in the tribe who's spending their time writing contextualized praise music. And the guys are meeting up and doing this, but the missionary's like, whoa, I've given you all these other jobs to do. You've got your daily offices. Why aren't the surplices being cleaned? Why isn't the altar linen being cleaned? It's getting tatty. What's going on here? He's discouraged about this, okay? This missionary is taking an ethnocentric view. But having said that, let us also bear in mind this missionary has probably risked their life just taking that boat journey to that country. They may even have sent their kids to boarding school so that they could go and be a missionary. They may even have lost their wife and youngest child to malaria in that context. So we're not saying this missionary is bad. We're saying here's someone who's really glorifying God with their life, but that at that stage, they weren't educated in their missionary training about contextualization. Okay? We have that knowledge today. What are we going to do with that? So, under the ethnocentric approach, you've got something that's called a cultural vacuum. Okay? A cultural vacuum is this. Some missionaries, they turn up at a place and they view the drums and the music of the receptor culture, the culture they're trying to give the gospel to, they view the drums and the music as pagan. And so the missionary tells the people to abandon that music, just leave it. And this vacuum is then filled by the missionary's culture. Because if there's a vacuum, it's going to be filled, right? So you say you can't have your drums. You can't have your scales the way you sing them. You can't have the keys that you have. You've got to have the music that the missionary gives you. He fills the gap with that. As a result, Christianity and its converts are viewed as foreign. Local people will look at the Christians and be like, that is foreign. And this also results in losing what? Missionary power. Okay. Next thing under ethnocentric. An ethnocentric approach is to do with suppressing culture. If a missionary bans certain local practices, they may go underground and still be secretly practiced by the church. So a missionary might say, no more dancing. This dancing is pagan, no more dancing. Well, the chances are they're going to say yes to the missionary. And then secretly on a Friday night, they're going to meet up and do dancing. And keep it secret from the missionary. Because it's just been suppressed. It is better to encourage the local converts to apply the scriptures to these situations and come up with their own conclusions. This is something that Paul Hebert says. He says, what you do is, he doesn't talk about dancing, but with the dancing thing, you'd say, hey guys, you know how you're into dancing? Why don't you see what the Bible says about that and try and work out what you should do? And then they, with the power of the Holy Spirit and God's word, they work out how to handle dancing. Rather than the missionary saying, you can't do dancing because in my culture, dancing is wrong. And then you might get the locals being like, oh, so what's this stuff about David dancing? and wrestling. And then that helps the missionary out, because the missionary's like, oh, they don't really teach on that verse in my church back home. And then together, they've got to wrestle with it and do what's called theologizing, which we'll be coming on to in the next session. All right, another part of the ethnocentric approach is acclimatization to the missionary culture. When you acclimatize to the missionary culture, some of you might have experienced this where, you go up north and after a few days you find you start talking a bit different. Or maybe for you, you come down south and you find you start picking up phrases and talking a bit different. That's called acclimatization, right? You acclimatize to a certain culture. Sometimes missionaries are successful because their own culture actually looks attractive to the receptor culture. So, to quote Smalley, in a few areas of the world, it may be precisely the foreignness of the church which is the source of attraction to unbelievers. So there are cases where the missionaries look so different to the locals, and their culture looks so different that locals are like, oh, I want this. Yeah. Some of you might have experienced this if you go on holiday in a certain country, and you might have found sometimes the local people have just taken a real shine to you. In some contexts that happens. In other contexts, you turn up and people don't take a shine to you at all. Yeah, like if you're an Englishman going on holiday in France, like you tend to find people aren't like being like, oh wow. There's other places you go to and people are like, can I help you? And so sometimes it can work that your foreignness is actually attractive for people with the gospel. But here's the problem. In those cases, we still need to be aware of syncretism, which we'll come on to in the next session. And we've done a bit of syncretism, studied it, and a lot of us have done a lot of it in our lives as well. Because then what happens, you just assume that the missionary's culture is a godly culture. And you take everything he or she gives, and you don't examine it and because you've given up your home culture, you're even less likely to examine it. You just take all of it and face value as, yeah, this is the right way. Okay, now there's another approach we could do, which again is a wrong approach, which is an uncritical, merely accommodation approach. This is where uncritically you just lap up everything in the culture, yeah, which would be ethnocentric from the other direction. Where you just say, look, I'm just going to take everything about this culture. I love this culture. This could easily happen. When I went to Albania, I fell in love with Albanian culture. I was like, English culture is rubbish. Albanian culture is the best. Well, you've got to be careful about that because it can lead to syncretism. It can definitely lead to syncretism. So, for example, Bavinck talks about this in his Science of Missions, yeah? He wrote this, I think it was back in the 60s. So he says, in the last decade, so remember this is quite a few years ago, numerous sects have been formed in Africa which call themselves Christian, but in their exercise of worship, they give a great deal of leeway to practices of pagan origin, such as stimulating music, the dance, nightly gatherings, and the like. So he's saying some people have just taken the accommodation approach, where they're just like, we take all of this stuff uncritically, right? And he's saying, these many hundreds of sects confront the church with the difficult problem of retaining its own character without losing its recruiting power. So he's saying, look, this is the problem, yeah? We've got to try and work out how can the church in Africa keep its character, yeah? So that it doesn't lose its missionary power. But at the same time, we don't want to do stuff that's pagan. With some hesitation and with great pains, the church now seeks liturgical forms. Liturgical forms is the way you do your worship in your church. Liturgical forms more suited to the emotional character of the African tribes and peoples. So he's saying what some people have done, it's been hard work, but they've now been trying to work out how can we do worship styles that fit African culture better? Because African culture in general is more emotional than European culture. The same problems also appear in New Guinea, where a similar effort is being made to acquire an appropriate liturgical form. That's Bavinck. You also find Paul Hebert talks about this and says how people have been trying to deal with this in Africa. So an accommodating approach just says, hey, we don't care if this stuff is pagan. Let's just take it all. It's wonderful. And that is bad, because that can lead to syncretism. So let me tell you Bavinck's approach now. His approach is called possessio, taking possession. Yeah, this is from, we looked at this last time, from 1 Corinthians, where we take every thought captive for Christ. So what we do, we take an aspect of the culture captive for Christ, and it will be transformed within the church community. We're not saying we transform it outside, but within the church community, we transform that aspect of the culture. This is not the same as accommodating the culture. People often confuse it with accommodating. Accommodating is where you say, we're just going to do what our culture does. Possessio is where we say, we're going to take it and change it. Yeah, so for example, I've given the example, so I've given it before, so sorry to be repetitive, but the way we do our worship at New Life Church is basically possessio. It's taking the music culture of this estate, but then we transform it because the lyrics are about Jesus. The lyrics are rooted in God's word. But also, like I've said before, the singer who leads it doesn't stand at the front facing everyone. The singer stands with the congregation facing the front. I'm not saying everyone has to do that. I'm just saying in our context, this is the way we've done possessio. We're not scared of music. We're not scared of music. We recognize that God is the one who created music, not the devil. So we're going to possess that music. We're going to take possession of it for Jesus Christ. And we're going to make it captive to Jesus Christ. And we're going to say, where there has been idolatry, where the gospel could be muddled, we're going to do something about that, take possession of it, and change it in a certain way for the glory of Jesus Christ. Okay, so now that moves us nicely into New Life Church case study. Okay, so at New Life Church, Roehampton, yeah, the music style we use in our worship is the same style found on this estate in halls and pubs and living rooms, yeah? So if you come in this building, yeah, if you come in this building tonight or Friday night or Saturday afternoon, yeah, you're going to find a DJ over there in that corner, some weeks in that corner. You can find some pretty big speakers for this room, probably about like this high, a couple of them, and you're going to find a guy DJ in there on his laptop, yeah, which is different to my culture back in the day where it'd be vinyl only. But it'd be DJing with laptop, and the music they will be playing will be like, there'll be a bit of hip hop, there'll be a bit of pop music, there'll be a bit of house music. It will be basically dance music, but like of a variety. There'll be a bit of reggae, and in this room, you'll have old people sitting there with a pint, having conversations with people, and you'll have young kids running around, and you'll have middle-aged people, and you have young people, you have all sorts, yeah? You have, all kinds of people. So at New Life Church Roehampton, that's what our music is. Some of our songs are reggae. Some of them are dance tunes. Some of them are more on the R&B side of things. Some of them, if they had rapping, you'd think they'd hip-hop, but they've got singing to them. Some of them are hymns with a bit of a deep bass line going on them. So we've got a bit of fusion going on there with a bit of hymns, with a bit of, whatever you want to call it, bass line. So that's what we've done there. But we haven't just stopped there, okay? We use the different psalm genres for our worship music. Yeah, so we've got different genres. So, for example, we have lament songs, because one of the big genres in the Psalms is lament. So we have some songs just crying out to God, complaining. Okay? Now, we had to write those ourselves, because in the UK, there isn't a lot of worship songs that are laments. So we've had to write those ourselves. But we've also got king psalms, because that's a genre of the Psalms, where we just sing about Jesus is on the throne. And we sing that. And basically, I've got a whole bunch of beats ready at the moment to write new lyrics to. And the way I'm going to do it is by looking at all the different genres of the Psalms and saying, which genres are we weak on? What do we need more songs written for? And then those beats I've got ready will be used for for writing songs for those genres. So can you see, we're not just lapping up the culture around us. We're saying, how does God's word inform the way we worship? Our lyrics have got to be rooted in God's word. Okay, next point. The theological content of our songs are worked out of scriptures in the community. Now, this isn't the case where we've taken a well-known worship song and remixed it. Yeah, but a lot of the songs that I'm writing now, they're basically as a result of I'm preparing a sermon, yeah, and doing the FCF. And then I'm trying to pick a song to sing, because we sing a song after the sermon, right? And then I'm like, we don't have any songs that tie in with this FCF and how the gospel speaks to this FCF. And then I'm like, I need to write a song for that. So now what's happening is the theological content of our songs comes out of scripture meeting the needs of our community, which is where the FCF comes in. And that is indigenous worship. Okay. Next point. The performance style, as I said, is identified but transformed. People are used to seeing someone on the mic. Yeah? So we have someone on the mic, but we have them standing in a different place. The other way we've transformed the style is the volume, the music levels. The kind of music we're doing does have to be loud. Same way when you come in here, when it's not UMP and there's a DJ playing, it's loud. It's too loud for me. I'm trying to have a conversation with someone, I'm thinking that music's loud. You know, what we do at church, we make sure it is loud enough that you can hear it the way that genre is supposed to be heard. There is supposed to be a bass drum. So you need to hear that bass drum go, We want to show God's glory in the way those air molecules are being moved with that bass drum, knowing that Jesus Christ is holding those molecules together and knowing that God in his creativity has given us gifts of music so that we can move air molecules a certain way that people could be like, ooh, I like that. God is an amazing God. But at the same time, we want to hear everyone in the congregation singing. We want to hear one another singing. So we don't want the music cranked up so loud that you can't hear your brothers and sisters singing. Then that's too much like when you go to a nightclub. Yeah, we want to transform that aspect of our culture within the church. So here's the thing. If you like raving and you come to New Life Church, that part of your culture doesn't get suppressed and driven underground. You don't have to become a secret raver who's going to nightclubs on your own. You can just come to our church on Sunday morning, isn't it? And you're here, your bass line's there, you're here the music you like, and you can dance, yeah? In a transformed way, hopefully. But at the same time, we're going to change it up a bit in that you're going to hear everyone else singing. We're transforming that. So we've worked hard, and it has been hard, to set up the speakers in the right place, to get the volume levels right. Some people think you're crazy when you're trying to work this out. Why did you spend so much time trying to get the sound right? It's a theological principle here. Congregational singing, hearing our brothers and sing together, because the scriptures say, from Colossians, what we saw earlier, sing to one another. So if I can't hear you, you ain't singing to me. And if you can't hear me, I ain't singing to you. The Psalms talking about declaring God's praises with my brothers and sisters. So you've got to be able to hear one another declaring the praises. So that would be an example of transformation. So I hope you can see that with New Life Church, we've contextualized the worship in a way that identifies but also transforms, and in a way that is still rooted in God's word. So, if you can do the discussion questions now, please. Okay, now we're talking about how to contextualize church. Part of contextualizing church is contextualizing theology. You've got to contextualize your theology. Paul Hebert says, the people must develop a theology in which Scripture speaks to them in their particular historical and cultural settings. Okay, so the theology of your church needs to speak to people in their context. And we will cover this more in self-theologizing next. Okay, so we'll come on to this. It's part of contextualizing church, but we're not going to cover it yet. Let's now move on to the next thing, contextualizing church family life. Contextualizing church family life. The way things are is not necessarily appealing to the target culture. So, for example, when I set out to plant a church on this estate years ago, I noticed that churches in the surrounding areas had a midweek meeting. But on this estate, the young people were meeting up almost 24/7. They were hanging out on the street every evening hanging out together. And I looked at that and I was like, there's no way we're going to be able to bring people into church. We say, hey, come to our wonderful Christian family. We meet on a Sunday morning and a Wednesday night. They're going to be like, my crew meet up all the time. And for them to leave that lifestyle and come into your church lifestyle, basically the church family lifestyle is not contextualized for this context. That's one of the reasons why in our early days we had something every night of the week. So every night of the week you could be with us. It was either Bible study, prayer meeting, outreach, watching a Christian film together, about evolution or something, And we just did that. And it was funny because people who thought that was weird were middle-class Christians. They thought that was weird. Whereas for people who got saved on the estate, that was like, I need this.
How do you do that now? How do you learn to do that every night?
Well, you do it on, I don't do it now because of the stage of life I'm in with my family. It wouldn't be sustainable. So people meeting up with one another, one-to-ones, and some group stuff and like that. But now it's much more organic than it used to be. It used to be really structured. Now it's much more, it's up to you how you do it. Okay, wine and cheese parties. We covered that earlier today, yeah? A wine and cheese party might not, that kind of church family life might not work in a context. In fact, there was a place I studied at where they said they were doing a marriage enrichment day, or I think it was a day or weekend. And I was like, oh, Shay, let's go on this marriage enrichment thing. And then we're reading through the thing, and then it says, at the end, we will celebrate with a wine and cheese party. Straight away, I'm like, I ain't going. Yeah. Culturally, that is just so offensive to me. Yeah. That comes with a huge wrapper, yeah? Wine and cheese party, yeah? And I can't go into it right now, but basically, that is just, like, it ain't our kind of thing then. We're not going. If our church family life unnecessarily goes against the grain of the local culture, we will lose missionary power. Notice the word unnecessarily. There's going to be loads of ways we're going to go against the grain of the culture. One of them is Matthew 18. Yeah, if you've got a problem with someone, go and see them on your own. Yeah, if that doesn't work, bring someone else. If that doesn't work, tell it to the church and then kick them out. That goes against the grain of council estate culture. It's necessary because Jesus told us to do that. But there's some things that we might be doing that unnecessarily go against the grain, and we don't want those things. We want to get rid of those things. The hard thing is, especially those of us who have been Christians a long time, it's hard for us to know what those things are sometimes, because our Christian church culture just seems natural to us now. Okay, let's now talk about contextualizing church culture. The culture of your church, the things you do in your church, the practices you do in your church, the traditions in your church, they all come from our hearts, right? So what are we going to do? Well, first off, affirm whatever is already there from local culture. So please turn to Philippians 4:8. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. According to Dean Fleming, Paul actually here is basically using Hellenistic moralism. In the culture of the Philippians, which would have been Hellenistic, Greek, right? They would have had a lot of moral ideas about this is the right thing to do. And Dean Fleming says that Paul is basically borrowing Hellenistic moralism here. He's basically doing contextualization. He's using common ground with them. This is stuff that non-Christians would totally agree with. And he says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is worthy of respect, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, Whatever is commendable, if something is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Okay, what Paul's doing there is he's affirming something that was already in their culture. Hellenistic moralism. Of course, he's got the rest of the epistle, which the gospel obviously transforms it as well. But Paul's also saying to us, things that are good, think on these things. If something's good, we should then affirm it. So whatever is already in our cultures, in our church cultures that's good, we should affirm that, right? Which means you have to do some thinking about your church culture. Be like, okay, the way we do the offering, is that good? If it's good, then it's like, great, we affirm that. So if you were doing a church, and the Albanian culture has totally changed from when I was there, as it's been more westernized. But if you got people sitting on the pavement, you would affirm what's good about that. Okay, there's fellowship going on. There's men having healthy relationships with one another. And you would realize what's bad about our culture. Okay, in our culture, we like it when people in those situations are hidden away. We like it when they're playing computer games in their house with the curtains shut. We don't like it when they're out on the street for some reason. Yeah, and then you start seeing something about your own culture that isn't quite right, and being like, these guys are honest enough to be out in the street showing you I don't work. You affirm that, yeah. You affirm the fellowship, yeah. So you affirm those side of things. But let's read on. Next point: repent of whatever there is that is not biblical. So you affirm the good, but you also think, what do we do in our church culture that's not biblical? You know, that is stuff that we need to repent of. And that requires some serious reflection, and it often requires input from outsiders, because it's hard to critique your own culture because you think your culture's right. And an outsider can come in and say, why'd you do that? And you go, oh, I never thought of it before. And the outsider says, because it seems a bit off. And then you realize, oh, I need to repent of this. So if you're doing a church and the people are hanging out on the pavement, one of the questions would be, is there any aspect of this that we need to repent of? And to look at that carefully and get those people involved in that themselves, searching the scriptures. Some of them might come to a conclusion. It's okay, but it needs to be in its proper place in the appointed time. We need to make sure we're making the most of every opportunity. There's some other things that we're going to do as well as this, maybe. But that's like totally hypothetical, because I don't want to put an ethnocentric opinion on that. Okay, third point. Please turn to Romans 15, verses 7 to 9. Romans 15, 7 to 9. Now, here's the idea of welcoming people. So you welcome people. Give room for people of other cultures to be themselves. So can someone read out verse 7, please?
Accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God.
Okay. And in the Net Bible it says, receive one another. Anyone got any other words for that? Welcome one another. Is that ESV? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the idea of, in your church culture, it's got to be welcoming of people of different cultures. It's got to be welcoming. And allowing people to be themselves, to cook the food that they cook, to pray in the way that they pray, and welcoming to that. Now, if you are in a church in the UK, which all of us are, you're going to have difficulties with that, because that is not a trait of British culture. Yeah, British culture is very much, this is the right way to do things. You come here, you do it our way. What's the famous saying we have? When in Rome, yeah? When in Rome, do as the Romans do, yeah? That is a big part of British culture, yeah? And you will even find churches of ethnic minorities in this country who have that approach to church as well. This is the way we do it. If you want to come, do it this way. And so it's just something we want to think about. We want to affirm the good in the culture, repent of the bad, and be welcoming to people of other cultures. Give them room to be themselves instead of dictating to them, you have to be this way. And lastly, the church relates to the world in this way. And I'm going to quote Dean Fleming here. This is how the church, he says, should relate to the world. They function within their society as a prophetic subculture whose cross-shaped living offers a visible alternative to the ethos of the dominant culture. What he's saying there is the church should be a prophetic subculture in your community. Everything it does should be cross-shaped, right? So here's the thing, like in this neighborhood, we recognize what the culture of the locality is, of the area, the neighborhood. And then we say, okay, what's good in that? We'll take that. What's bad? We'll repent of that. And we will end up with a cross-shaped version of culture in this neighborhood. But we won't do it overnight. It will require years of all of us becoming more and more like Christ and submitting ourselves to what God's word says, which is hard because a lot of us just want everyone to submit to the way we want things to be done. So there will be this process, and in that we will become a prophetic subculture. So, for example, someone might ask, well, how do we do this when the area around us is so multicultural? Well, the way you do it needs to reflect that in a prophetic way. So one of the things I would do is I would look around your neighborhood and see when people gather together, how does it work? So, for example, football, the local football club, I'm talking about for kids here, yeah? At a football club, that's going to be multicultural, right? Yeah, I mean, our local football club here, you've got some really wealthy people bringing their kids along. You've got white working class from this estate, you've got Portuguese immigrants, yeah, you've got Eastern European immigrants, you've got West Indian, you've got a whole bunch of different cultures there. So I can look at that and be like, how do these people interact together? How do the football coaches arrange the stuff? How do the social functions work together? How are the parents with one another on the sideline? That tells me something about our culture. And then I'm like, okay, how do we do this in church? How we do it in church needs to hold on to the good that I see in our multicultural culture, needs to repent of the bad, and needs to have everything in the shape of the cross, metaphorically speaking, so that when people look at us, they don't just see another club in the neighborhood. They identify with it. They're like, oh, this is a multicultural gathering like I see in other places on the estate. But there's something different where they're like, ooh, there is something different here. It's hard work. But the people running the football club have also had to do this hard work. They've had to think through, okay, we've just got a new bunch of immigrants coming and they're coming to football club. We've got to work out how we communicate with them about this and that. We've got to try and get them integrated into our group activities, you know. Go to children's birthday parties if you've been invited and just look around and see, how does this work with all these different cultures here? See how it works. If you see the guy who's just come over from Korea helping out and serving up a Korean dish and going around serving people, then you're like, this is the way the non-Christians are rolling. When people from other cultures come in, they get them serving and doing their own food. At church, we've got to make sure we're doing the same thing. That Korean should be even more welcome here than at such and such a place. Okay, let's move on to contextualizing lifestyle. Contextualizing lifestyle, I'm going to quote Paul Hebert again here from his book Transforming Worldviews. The church in each locale, as a community of faith, must define what it means to be Christian in its particular socio-cultural and historical setting. So he's saying the church has got to show people what a Christian looks like in your area, right? So if you're in Middlesbrough, the church needs to show what does a Christian man look like in Middlesbrough. If you're in Roehampton, church needs to show what does a Christian woman look like in Roehampton. It must take responsibility for defining and keeping biblical orthodoxy, so it's got to be biblical, and it must do so by defining how Christianity is different from its cultural surroundings. So he's saying that the church needs to show other people in the area how being a Christian is different to just being someone else on the estate. That's part of our job as a church, to show how we are different. which again brings us back to our contextualization. If our contextualization is only identificational, are we showing people how we're different? No, then we just look just the same like the world, yeah? Although we might not do it as well as whatever we're doing as well as the world. So then we're just showing that we're not as proficient as them, yeah? It's when we do the transformational part of contextualization, transforming our culture in the church, that then we show ways that we are different. So in terms of lifestyle, we want to help people see what doesn't need to change in their lifestyle. Yeah, so some people, like for me, yeah, when I made a recommitment to God, I put my record decks away. It's like, well, a Christian doesn't use turntables. If a Christian doesn't DJ, surely put them away. It was years later when I felt God spoke to me about setting up a music studio to reach out to the youth in my neighborhood. That was when I got the record decks out and dusted them off. And I was like, I'm going to use these for God's glory now. But I was under the impression that, okay, now I need to get rid of that. It's part of my old life. But we've got to help people try and work out what do you need to get rid of and what don't you need to get rid of. There's a lot of things that people get rid of when they become Christians that they don't need to get rid of. But we also need to show people what they do need to change. We need to help someone see this part of your culture does need to change. For some of us council estate Christians, there can be a bit of a tendency to just be really raw and rude and harsh with people. And then if someone says something to us, we'll be like, what? That's how I am. That's just me, innit? We need someone to disciple us and say, actually, these parts of your culture need to change because they don't reflect Jesus. These things do need to change. So we show people what doesn't need to change, and we show people what does need to change. Okay, next point, monitoring. At some stage, the church would do well to reevaluate all its practices and attitudes to see how syncretistic they are. So the same way if you're running a business, you got your business plan, you should keep monitoring that. You should keep monitoring it. If you don't monitor it, your business could go into the ground and suddenly you're like, how did this happen? With our churches, it's a good idea to regularly reevaluate how contextual is our church. And we might even find, you know what, we were really contextual 10 years ago and the culture has changed so fast and we haven't changed with it. Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, like DJing used to be about turntables, record decks, yeah? Whereas now you're DJing, you're probably using a laptop, you know, or you're using CDJs. So you could have a church that maybe for their worship do turntables. I've seen churches that do that. They might be like, yeah, and then you might get some young people walk in and like, what's that? You know, and then it's like, okay, we got to think about this. Tim Keller makes the point that people often like the culture of the church they got saved into, and then they always want church to be like that. We got to be careful. It could be you got saved into a church that was perfectly contextualized for your time, and right now is a bit old-fashioned. It's a bit like if anyone years ago, back in the day, there was that film. Actually, I shouldn't mention the name in case there's inappropriate bits in it. I saw this when I was a kid. There's a film where this guy, he's been in prison for years and he was a pimp, right? And he got arrested in the 70s, yeah? And then he gets released in the 90s and he comes out of prison and he's walking down the street, yeah? And he's got like these platform shoes that have got goldfish in the hills. It's goldfish tank. There's little fish swimming around. He's got these big flares, yeah? And he's holding a cane and he's got like a top hat. And he's so proud, like walking down the street, and all the kids are just like, everyone's laughing at him as he walks down the street. And he's like, why is everyone laughing at me? In some ways, we can be like that as a church. We can be like 10, 20 years out of date, and we're thinking, yeah, we're contextual, but we need to monitor and reevaluate and be like, are we still contextual? Okay, if you could do the discussion questions, please. So now let's talk about contextualizing outreach. How do we contextualize our outreach, which outreach is obviously the mission of the seed theology. Paul Hebert's pointed out that methods that work in small tribal societies normally do not work in rural or urban settings, nor do methods appropriate for the city work in rural or urban settings. So it's something to bear in mind. For your context, you've got to think, What's the good way of doing outreach? What's the good way of contextualizing outreach? We live in an age where people will put something up on Twitter and say, hey, new evangelism thing. And then people will be like, great, I'll try that in my church. But we shouldn't be so quick to assume that what someone's done in Kansas is going to work in London or Manchester. I'm just going to give a few examples about outreach. Paul's example. We remember when we did mission lessons from Paul, we saw that Paul used Jewish and Gentile points of contact. Do you remember he would go in the temple? No, he didn't. He'd go in the theatre. He'd go in the marketplace. Where did he never go? Temple. He never went in any temples. Not that we ever recorded anyway. And I think if he had, I think Luke is a good enough historian that he would have mentioned that. So we got a lesson to learn here. Your points of contact have got to be contextualized. What points of contact work well in your neighborhood? Don't necessarily use points of contact that someone has done in a totally different context. It might not work. I'll give case studies from New Life Church. I'm not necessarily saying New Life Church is particularly good at outreach. I'm just giving you real life examples over the years. So some of you know that I actually started the first ever youth inclusion project in the country. And basically, I was doing outreach to youth on this estate. At that time, Wandsworth supposedly had the highest youth crime. I can't remember if it was in the country or in London or whatever, but basically I got approached from someone who said, we've heard about what you're doing in your neighbourhood. Would you like to get paid to do it? We got an idea for a new thing called the Youth Inclusion Project, and we want to pilot it. We think Roehampton's the place to do it. So suddenly I had all the funding to have a youth centre in the neighbourhood where me and my wife could work there full time, reach out to the youth. That is a great point of contact. Here's the problem. The Christian group I was involved with at the time, their sort of training was, look, first spend time letting people know that Christians are okay and God is good. And then later give them the gospel. Or maybe it was just first Christians are okay and then later you let them know God is good. So we spent lots of time using these points of contact to build really good relationships in the community. Lots of time built, and I kept thinking, I wonder when the people will be ready for the gospel. And after a while, I realized that we'd waited too long. We'd spent so long building relationships, we weren't giving people the gospel. People knew we were Christians, but we weren't actually giving people the gospel. So that's an example of using a point of contact the wrong way. Only building the relationships in the community, not giving the gospel. We gave it occasionally, but not big style. Okay, next example for New Life Church history was Gospel Night. So, we rented a shop front and borrowed it, can't remember, set up a sound system. Me and another guy would just freestyle to all the youth out on the street. My wife would sing. We'd get a crowd. We'd bring them inside. We'd bring them inside to do a Bible study. Then we would do a Bible study with them. We didn't know nothing about youth work. It would just be like 45-minute verse-by-verse Bible study. If kids had questions, we got videos of this. We're just going phrase by phrase through the text, 11-year-old, what does that mean? And then explain it and do that. That was very fruitful. It was so fruitful that apparently there were actually meetings that went on, and because it's on tape, I won't say, but there were recognized bodies in the neighborhood who were actually having meetings trying to work out how they could stop this, because they were so concerned that suddenly loads of youth, especially youth who were involved in crime, would come into all these Bible studies. But here was the problem. We didn't have a church to feed the young people into. So Gospel Night was a great example of contextualized outreach. It totally fitted the culture back then. Youth were into music. But we didn't have a church to feed it into. So you can contextualize something, but if you then don't have the church to feed them into, it's like having a bucket with a hole in it. Okay, the next example is Soul in the City. Who remembers a thing called Soul in the City? There used to be these outreaches that they do in London, try and get loads of churches work together. This happened a few years in our estate on the green. There'd be a big marquee set up. Sometimes I would be asked to do an outreach there, and so we do some rapping and some singing, and then you'd have an altar call at the end. We did get some response to that, but the problem was there was no direct feed from that to our church. So, and even sometimes at Soul in the City, they bring in other rappers from outside the area, and it would be interesting because sometimes I'd hear from a rapper later, oh, by the way, Duncan, I was on your estate, and you done an outreach. You know, some people responded at the altar call. and I'm thinking, who are they? What's their phone numbers? What church are they now going to? And what we found for Soul in the City is people would go up for an altar call at the end, but then wouldn't get stuck in a church. Or someone would direct them to a church where they didn't really get discipled. And again, it's like the bucket with the hole in it. Then we've also tried a thing called Jesus Booth, where we set up with PVC poles, set up a little booth on the estate, little square booth that at the top says information about Jesus. And we stood around it, and as people went up to us to see what it was, we said we got free information about Jesus. We give them DVDs, we give them flyers, we do a questionnaire, do you think you're a good person? We witness people, we had some Muslim girls come up, talk to us, until one of them said, oh, they're coming. And they suddenly just had to run because some Muslim boys were coming around the corner, and they were like, look, we can't be seen talking to you guys. It was a real shame. We're having a real good conversation about the Trinity, trying to explain the Trinity to them. Now, we found that was an excellent boost for the congregation. People in the congregation loved it, but we didn't actually really see any fruit from it, which was interesting. In terms of it being contextualized, we're local people, so to that point, it's contextualized. Setting up a booth, I don't know how contextualized that is, but the location we did it in, other people have set up stalls and that. So, for example, the Muslims will set up a stall and with a sign that says, love to all, hatred of none. So in that sense, you could say it was kind of contextualized. But we haven't seen a lot of fruit from that. Then there's our Sunday services, right, at church, where someone, and this is the thing that's really unsexy, yeah, but, like, this is what happens for us. Someone invites someone to church. They hear the gospel preached. They see the gospel lived out in the church family, and they get saved. That's where we've seen most of our fruit at New Life, okay? And that fits in with our biblical theology of mission, right? Where God is glorified in the church, people see the church being glorified, and they grab people and say, let me come to church with you, because God is among you. Again, that's different to the idea of what people call the attractional model, but it's really unfortunate they call it attractional, because church should be attractional. But the idea that if you put on a ton of programs and have professional musicians and everything, that then people will want to join your church. That tends to, people have observed that it tends to produce consumers who come to your church. But there should be a sense, I think, in which people come to your church, they hear the gospel contextually preached, and they see the gospel contextually lived out in your church family. And we find that when people visit our church, they tend to say, not always, but they tend to say, if they're locals, this feels like a family. And back in the day, I used to apologize for how small the church was. So I'd say, look, we are quite a small church. And people would normally say, no, it's great. Feels like a family. That's an example of contextualized outreach. That's something people believe in the worldview of this neighborhood, is family. But we also have a lot of dysfunction in our families. So to live out the church family a certain way is a powerful way to do contextualized outreach, identification and transformation. Then we have our video ministry. People watch some of our sermons online or on DVDs and then come to church. So normally if someone comes to our church, a lot of times they will say to me, oh, I've been watching the sermons online. They'll watch for a few weeks before they come to church. That's an important part of our ministry. Shane got saved because of our ministry, being given the DVDs. There was more to it than that, but that was a big part of it. So we believe in that as a contextualized part of doing outreach. That's why one of the reasons why contextualize the style of the preaching, contextualize the content of the preaching, FCF, and get it on YouTube. And that's one of the reasons why we don't put our videos on Vimeo. Again, contextualization, because Vimeo and Roehampton just seems to stop and buffer or just stop dead, and then you've got to refresh and get it going again. And in general, people in Roehampton aren't sharing Vimeo videos, they're sharing YouTube. So that would be an example of contextualization there. Then Bible teaching, the way we do Bible teaching, people tend to say at our church, oh, you break it down. So we even had a family visit from an estate in Battersea. They turned up, they weren't Christians. They turned up, the mum came up to me, she's got all her kids around her, and she says, she's like proper excited, she says, we came here because we heard that you teach the Bible, you break it down. That was why she comes. She said she tried going to the church on her estate, she didn't understand what the guy was going on about. Travelled to our estate. Now, unfortunately, there was, and this is one of the things about council estate ministry, there was a family feud that ended up meaning we lost that family. Because in general, on council estates, if there's some beef with someone, you don't just lose them, you lose their whole family too. So that was unfortunate, but the style of preaching, breaking it down, yeah, or for you guys, that would be help, yeah, and letting the text do the heavy lifting. And that style of preaching, yeah, was what attracted someone from another estate. And one of our guys who got saved during the sermon, where at the end of the sermon, he come up and said, I want to be saved. One of the things he said to me that drew him to that point was, one, the preaching that he said, you break it down. The other thing was he said, the way that you dress, Duncan. He said, the way you dress, the way people dress at the church, the informal nature of the church, he said that spoke volumes to me, which is very, very interesting. So contextualize outreach. All right, now let's move on to Geelong, another case study. So you've already looked at the outreach that we done in Geelong in Kosovo. So I won't cover about how we contextualize the message there. You've done that. But notice that we used the point of contact of music. That's an example of contextualized outreach. You've got all them cafes there with all their music blaring out at night. People got that party vibe going on. And so, the Albanian missionary said to us, maybe hip-hop is the point of contact here. We put on a concert. Maybe that's the way. And then we contextualized the message, but then notice we brought people into the church. So we didn't just leave it on the street, oh, we shared the gospel with you, now we do a runner. We brought people into the church. So the people you saw in the video who were there in the church, most of those people came through the outreach we were doing in the week, which also involved, I don't think the video covered, but that also involved us walking around. Because obviously, who were we? Higher vibe, It's not like we have any kind of fame or anything. But when you got your posters up all over the town and you can walk down the street, and when you're foreigners, people come up to you and the people walking with you can say, yeah, they're doing a concert this Saturday. And people are like, ooh. So it was a good point of contact to try and then bring people into the church. Now, lastly, let's finish with Nidri. So there's a church in Nidri, which is a council estate in Edinburgh. Mes McConnell is the pastor. And I think it's really helpful seeing how they have contextualized outreach, because they've used points of contact that are already in the community. So check it out, right? There's a high number of drug addicts in the area, right? And now, right, the doctors will actually refer some of their patients to the church. Some of their patients who are heroin addicts, they say, well, here's my advice, go to Nidri Church. Yeah, they've got a drug program. That's using the point of contact of your local GP. That's a wonderful thing, yeah. But they also get involved in anything going on in the community. So if there's some committee that's planning something in the neighbourhood, people from their church will get involved in it. Then they're mixing with other people for the committee, and then when it comes to whatever the event is they're putting on, whatever festival it is or whatever, or school event, then they're mixing with more people. So they're using the points of contact already there, don't cost no money. Yeah, just using the points of contact that are already there. But they also have a building where they run a cafe and various activities, and that's open to locals. So by doing that, they're creating new points of contact. And a cafe on an estate is a good point of contact, right? I mean, there's certain things that people on estates like greasy cafes, betting shops, yeah, off license, and a supermarket, right? And sadly, there's too many off licenses and betting shops on so many estates, which is tragic. I wish there were laws against that. But CAF, and what if maybe there isn't a CAF, but then as a church, you could set up a CAF or something, you know? But then of course, there's other contexts where a CAF wouldn't work. So, you know, you've got to think about contextualizing it. And then the last thing for Nidri is they bring people into the church. So good thing about with Nidri as well, they have this CAF, it's in the church building, and then people get used to coming into the church building. It's very easy to then say people come to church on Sunday and to bring people in that way. Okay. So there's, if you can do the discussion question now, please. So does anyone have any questions about contextualizing the church?
So, you know when you were saying that one of your points was to have a church where people can be themselves, and so is the big idea to target?
Well, welcome people so they can be themselves. But ultimately, in any church, we all want to be being transformed into the image of Christ. So if we only let people be themselves, then we will end up being syncretists, and we will uncritically take on board the culture. We want to welcome people, but we're also welcoming people to be transformed into the image of God's Son. So it's sort of like, come as you are, but God's going to change you.
Okay, so it's the big idea, the big picture to reach out to every culture within your local community. Is that what you've been saying through this whole thing?
So that's a good question. So the mission that the church has been sent on is for God's people to be continually expanding as we're making disciples of all types of people. So in our neighborhood, if there's lots of different types of people and we're only reaching a certain type of person, then I say we need to look at that and consider, should we be branching out more? And also to not overestimate what you can do in a year and not underestimate what you can do in 5 years. So if you're like, well, we're not reaching any Pakistanis at the moment, it might be a case of being like, right now, who have we got in the church who we can send out to reach Pakistanis? Might be like, right now, no one. But we've got this person here who would be able to reach out to someone who's mixed, I don't know, I'm just making this up at the top of my head, mixed race between Pakistani and white British or something. And then that person will end up reaching out to Pakistani. So I'm not saying tomorrow, let's make sure all the people groups are reached. But I'm saying let's be thinking about it and thinking, how can the gospel keep spreading, making these incremental cultural gaps? But here's the thing, if we have a real ethnocentric church, then that ain't ever going to happen. Because as we try and reach out to those people, they won't come in. So we want to start thinking about it as early as possible. And but I am thinking, try to reach the groups in your area.
In some elements of working class culture, people speak to each other and they swear in their speech. Now, at church, is that always sin? This is something I've been trying to think about. So the people that I've been trying to reach out to the last few weeks and months and stuff, they're constantly swearing in their speech to me. So it'd be like,
Well, that would be beyond the scope of today's class.
It's because I'm thinking, is that just cultural then? Or does that need to be transformed? Or
we should never say, is that just cultural? Because what's culture?
Coming out of our heart.
Externalization of our heart. So saying it's just cultural, that's like saying, it's just their heart, really. And so it's like, well, that's never okay. So, but it's beyond the scope of this, in that you then got to do the hard work with them to look through and see what can I keep from my culture and what do I need to repent of, and see what does the Bible say about this.
I was just going to ask if Pastor E doesn't mind asking the question that he was going to ask. being more things to all people?
So I think it went something like, some things you do are going to attract others but repel like other aspects of the community. And so would it suggest that there ought to be a focus on targeting particular aspects of the community, particular cultures within the community, especially if you're in a multicultural environment?
So I want to have my cake and eat it, basically. But I also want to be realistic. So I think it's good to target specific groups with the gospel. But I think it's bad to only have that your end game being reaching that group. And I think we want to have a mindset of God's people continually expanding and the gospel continually spreading across cultural gaps. How do you do that? It's a gradual process. So, for example, New Life Church starts off initially reaching out to like born and raised council estate people, right? But along the way, some people from slightly different cultures start becoming part of the church family. The challenge, then what we need to do is work out, okay, now we've got different cultures in here, let us use this to transform our church culture even further, to repent of all the things that are bad, to be more godly in our church culture, to take the good from these other cultures, to grow together, and to get better at outreach to reaching more different types of people. So the people who come in, we make sure they don't lose their missionary power so that then they can reach out to other people. Now, it might be that you come to a point where you're like, we just can't reach these two groups because what makes this group happy is totally offensive to that, yeah? And with that, I suppose I would just say cross that bridge when you come to it. I think that in the UK, most of us don't get anywhere near that point. I think most of us just, whatever our church culture ends up being, we just assume that's a Christian culture. And so I suppose I would want to see a specific example of where that thing actually happens. So maybe you could give me if you've got a specific example.
Well, I mean, so if you've got white working class drinking culture on one hand, and then Muslims on the other hand, and if you were going to take steps that would, in ways, be attractive to white working class drinking culture, that's going to repel Muslims, based on their view of alcohol and their disrespect for you if you associate with it in any kind of public way. So that's the kind of thing that. Okay. So let's say you've got a council estate that's 50% white working class, 50% Muslim, right? And you're trying to reach out to the white working class people, and one of the ways you do it is by going in the pub, because a lot of the men there are in the pub. So you're going in the pub, reaching out to them, and you've decided that you're going to have a pint of beer because you know you can handle that safely, and you're not going to end up getting drunk, and it helps communicate. You've decided in your context that actually helps communicate the gospel better to these guys. This isn't my own personal approach, but let's say you did that. Then you find that there's some Muslims who are interested in the gospel, but this idea of going in a pub would be terrible to them. What I would do in that stage is I would say, okay, Fred, you're doing pub outreach. And then I'd say, Ashkan, you are doing Muslim outreach. And that's the way I would approach it. And then along that journey, Ashkan would use it as a gospel opportunity to explain to the Muslims he's reaching out to. So when he's explained the gospel clearly, he says, do you know that the Bible teaches that we have liberty in certain things? And one of those is alcohol. So there's some people in the church who will drink alcohol. But the gospel also teaches us that we shouldn't put a stumbling block in the way of other people. So myself, I have voluntarily said I will not touch alcohol. And I've come to you to share the gospel with you, and I'm not going to drink alcohol because of my friendship with you,
and because I believe this is what my Saviour, Jesus, wants me to do. And then you use it as a gospel opportunity to communicate something that Islam doesn't have in its worldview. And there's opportunities there like about the Trinity. You say our God is a Trinitarian God, which means there's variety within the Godhead. And so we believe in the church there should be variety. That would be the approach I take. Then when it comes to things like New Year's Eve parties, I would say my understanding of Corinthians is that drink would be the thing we give up rather than not drinking at the party. So we would say it's a no drinking New Year's Eve party because that would cause offence, whereas the not drinking would not really cause offence or cause anyone to stumble. And in white working class culture as well, there are weddings where people say no alcohol and you say why, and people say because of my uncle, you know, and so on. So that would even be within the culture of for some people. Maybe not for others. You're looking a bit like...
What, mate?
Yeah.
Oh no. I mean, we when we got married, we chose a venue where we couldn't have alcohol, and I thought that would help as well. So, but if you had like a church that had a covenant with no alcohol, then no one's going to be offended either way, either, because the people who think it's okay to drink, no, it's okay to drink, but not in this building, and the people who don't like to drink, they're not going to say anyway. So.
I just had a thought that's just disappeared. I think, ultimately, what I'm hoping comes from the UMP, one of the things is that you get forced into Acts 15 situations. I'm hoping that you'll be in situations where you're reaching out to more different types of people, or even there's people in your church already that you're realizing they've basically just been having to put up with the majority culture for a long time. And that now we'll be having these Acts 15 meetings where we're like, hang on a minute, how are we doing things? I mean, someone shared the other week about how there was a church that they saw a church had the St. George's flag outside, and so they didn't feel welcome in that church. That is a great discussion to have in a church. You know, it's a great discussion to promote understanding. You know, some people will be like, "What are you talking about? That's the flag of this country." Other people will be like, "Yeah, but don't you understand what that communicates for some people?" And then you have a great conversation, and then you start thinking, how can I love my brother and sister? How can I prefer my brother and sister? Is there something that's getting in the way of this? And then you deal with it and you come up with a resolution like they do in Acts 15. You know, you might, who knows what it's going to be? You know, on the Queen's birthday, we will put the flag up, and during football season, we put the flag up, but the rest of the year we won't, because it's hindering the gospel going to certain people or something, you know.
It's probably just helpful saying it, that I guess with those things, it's not the outcome that's necessarily right or wrong. It's that you've gone through that process and done your best to work out what's actually going to be for the greater good, the gospel. It's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. Yeah.
I would see the right answer is the one that shows God to be most glorious. All right. Can you do the discussion questions, please?